Hour two of a 3-hour program. Bold Republic is on the air, now heard in Casper, Wyoming, as well as many other parts in, let me see, Dakotas and Montana. And the show is just expanding on out. And for those who are a little unfamiliar with the show, on Thursdays, we check in with Wyoming Liberty Group, and Steve Klein has been on hold. And where are you today, Steve?
I'm down here in Cheyenne, Glenn.
Okay. And you've been busy, from what I've understand, because I've read a couple of articles that you've posted, and before whatever you're going to talk about today, everything's on hold as far as I'm concerned, because you apparently had a chance to testify and win something recently, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we're winning litigation down here. We filed another lawsuit this morning. We continue to go after unconstitutional campaign finance laws in the Wyoming statutes. And we're pretty excited that now it looks like a lawsuit is wrapping up against the state of Wyoming, and that independent and third-party candidates will soon be able to raise money. Under the law, they were pretty much prohibited from raising money outside of their own bank accounts or their immediate families before the August 19th primary. You have to keep in mind these minor parties like the Constitution Party, and our client Jennifer Young, who's their nominee, was nominated through convention. So the idea was they were going to prohibit any fundraising for the general election until the primary. So that was a pretty open and shut case, and I was really happy the state of Wyoming declined to even really go challenge the law, challenge our or reply to our challenge, to say that argue against it. So that's very good. In the meantime, this morning we filed another lawsuit against the Secretary of State against the aggregate contribution limits that are currently under Wyoming law. Right now, an individual donor can only give $25,000 total every 2 years, spread out through elections, the primary and the general election. And the problem with that is we have about 90 seats here in between the two houses, 75 of which are actually up for grabs right now. Not everybody's running opposed, but there are a lot of races, and our clients, the Brophies out of Wilson, Wyoming, they've already almost collectively contributed $50,000 between the two of them, or $25,000 apiece. So filed a lawsuit on their behalf, and that follows a Supreme Court decision that came out a few months ago called McCutcheon versus FEC. So should be another kind of open and shut case. But so making elections more competitive, giving access to minor party and independent candidates, and allowing donors to support people of all political stripes across the board is, I think it's opening up Wyoming and making our laws, our elections more competitive, giving people more options, and I think the benefits are endless, Glenn.
Yeah, well, and some people don't like competitiveness in Wyoming elections. I mean, you got the cutesy little Democrats out there in the state of Wyoming that make it look like you're running against somebody, but many of these are uncontested, so the more the merrier. How much of this had to do with the recent Supreme Court decision? I mean, is that why you guys stepped forward and filed these suits?
Yeah, the McCutcheon versus Federal Election Commission overturned aggregate limits under federal law, and it's a pretty cut and dry decision that, well, you already have individual contribution limits that prevents corruption or appearance, and under federal law, it's in the low thousands of dollars. Here in Wyoming, it's $1,000 per candidate. So what's the purpose of having this aggregate limit, a $25,000 across the board limit, other than people talk about equality? Well, that's not really a First Amendment interest. People talk about they make corruption a very abstract kind of thing, that somehow candidates are going to be beholden to donors because they gave to somebody else. So it takes the idea of corruption, quid pro quo, the idea that you're doing something for monetary gain, it takes it to such abstract levels that it's really meaningless, and that opens the door to further censorship. So we fight against that. But I agree with you. Again, it's a matter of getting the most people into these races, and again, we fight on a more basic level against the red tape found in election laws that threaten anybody who gets involved at the grassroots level, especially. I don't believe you should have to have an attorney or an accountant to run for office. It shouldn't put you at risk, but the election code, usually one violation can get you a civil penalty of up to $10,000. A deliberate violation can get you, jail time. So that's a problem. Again, you're putting yourself under the gun here just to participate in our government, which doesn't really make sense to me, and that's kind of what we fight at the bigger level. So, yeah, but I should add, and I got to tell you, Glenn, this is kind of a scoop. I've been throwing it out there on Twitter, but we even have, one Democratic candidate for Senate, one Charlie Hardy. He's got himself a bus. I don't know what the story is behind this bus. I call it the Mystery Machine. It's from the 1970s, I think. And he's got it parked here in Cheyenne, and for some reason they had to put that paperweight behind my apartment building. And I'll tell you this much. You want a controversy?
Yeah,
go for it. It's got Washington State plates on it.
Oh, for Pete's sake. So what is this guy from Washington State doing here?
I don't know.
Besides harassing you
his bus. I'm just saying he's got some outside donor giving him a bus.
Okay. All right. Well, and there is a lot of outside money always poured in, especially when it comes to, small. Well, I shouldn't say especially small states. If there's a chance of influencing any election, outside donors will step in and do that. But okay, let's take a look at, because we're talking two things at once here. Let's focus for just a moment on political parties in the state of Wyoming, because from time to time people want to start up a separate party, and it's very difficult for people to get a party recognized by the state of Wyoming. Has anything changed there?
Not recently, no.
Okay.
Again, what we took out was one chunk of this, again, acknowledging the difficulty of ballot access, and ballot access is a huge issue, don't get me wrong, but it's following that we really took care of the fact that you have your minor party, you've nominated your candidates through convention, you don't want to go through a primary process, and then you can't raise a dime until after the general election. In particular, our client Jennifer Young, Constitution Party candidate, she's running in a contentious Secretary of State race. You've got 4 Republicans in a primary right now duking it out, and that's right. She's only going to face off against one of those candidates, whoever wins the Republican primary. But nevertheless, you look at it from, they're out there not just running in the primary. They are running for the general right now. It's just only one of them is going to get to go forward. And you have, under the law as well, they get to go back after the primary and raise another $1,000 from the same contributors, and they can also carry over excess funds from the primary. So even from an equality perspective, you have fundamental problems with fairness. So we're really happy that we're soon to knock that out. It's the state has agreed to our injunction, but the injunction hasn't actually issued yet from the federal court. So we hope that happens soon.
For those listening on radio, I'm talking to Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group, where he's on the phone from Cheyenne. So, okay, part of the reason I asked that is, in the state of Wyoming, pretty much everybody will say to you that the general election is not the real election in this state. It's such a heavily Republican state that the primaries is where everything is really settled. So opening up to other parties, to me anyway, Steve, says, well, there's now a better chance because we might have 3 candidates, and that means that enough votes might actually be taken away from the Republican candidate. To me, competition is good, whether I agree with the candidate or not.
Agreed. Well said.
Okay, now let's get back to the individual candidates. So a lot of the people that I've been interviewing here, and we're sort of election central here, Steve. If you walk into the offices of the Campbell County Observer / American Standard Media, we have signs up the walls, and there's bumper stickers, and any candidate can come in and just put their stuff here, and people can come in and ask about the candidates, and we'll give them their materials, yard signs, all of that. I've been meeting a lot of people who have never run for office before, which, Steve, warms my heart. And they just see a problem, and they want to get involved in the race, even if they've never run before. And they're trying to figure out how to do this. So I guess what you're telling me that up until now, it's been very difficult for somebody who has little to no budget at all, just an average Joe person with an average job at the coal mine, to get involved in the race. I mean, did they have it rigged for the establishment, or am I overstating it?
Until now, it's definitely, the law definitely protected the monopoly of the major parties. There's no other way to put it. And again, that law dates to about 2009. I don't believe it was necessarily nefarious. I mean, you've had since 2010, especially the Tea Party wave, and you had a lot more interest in having third parties. And as you mentioned, it's difficult to build one. It's difficult to maintain one, continue to have recognition under state law. And that's something certainly we might look into sometime down the road. We're really focused on the free speech stuff right now. but again, it was so. It is pretty glaring that this problem was not really raised. It was unfortunate that Senator Cale Case and Representative Jim Byrd, in a bipartisan bill in the last budget session, tried to introduce a bill that would have fixed this problem, that would have allowed minor party and independent candidates to raise money before the primary election date, and that failed introduction in the Senate. And you have to look at some of the bills that they did consider. And my favorite joke bill of last session was the bill that Senator Esquivel introduced to try and ban Google Glass, right, while driving.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, really, that's really something we need to be considering right now.
Yeah,
how many, Google Glass in Wyoming? I don't know.
Yeah, accidents have we had? Yeah, really. Well, okay. Let me ask this. Okay, so we've struck this down, and way to go, Steve. So now, what comes in its place? Because when you delete something in politics, something's going to fill the hole. It's like air sucking back into the room. A giant sucking sound is coming our way. Steve, what happens next?
I'm very cognizant of that, and I can tell you that I was very enthused following the Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivision Committee of the Wyoming Legislature. They had their meeting in Sheridan in early June, and they understood that election laws are a double-edged sword. In a lot of the best instances, sometimes they're just a sword striking down free speech. And I think what we're going to have going forward, there were some things, particularly as far as ballot measures, when we want to put something on the ballot and get something for the people to vote for directly, but there are some unconstitutional laws on there right now, and they're working to put together a committee bill. They're working closely with the Secretary of State's office to put together, I believe they will have a committee bill to overturn the aggregate contribution limits. Even Senator Charlie Scott, to his credit, wanted to lift PAC contributions limits before they even go into effect. It's funny, there's a bill a few years ago that would do that, and he wants a committee bill that will lift PAC contribution limits. Again, the idea, we have a disclosure system through the Secretary of State for contributions, for money going to politicians. It's all there. It's all online, very accessible. What's the point of limiting it when you can have these very competitive races? And races are, especially the statewide races, are definitely getting a lot more expensive. Governor Meade dropped $1 million of his own money in the 2010. So I think district by district, a House race, 10 grand is still a war chest for a House race, but it's a drop in the bucket in a statewide race. So getting that money there, people know where it's coming from. I mean, I oppose a lot of other disclosure, but I don't really have a problem with money going directly to candidates. So I think that really will open up a lot of things.
Yeah.
If you want to shift gears a little, Glenn, I tell you, there's some a little less good things going on at the Judiciary Committee on the civil forfeiture topic.
Okay, let's talk about that next up, because I know that's something big on your agenda, and I don't want to pass it up. I got to pay some bills. More with Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group up next. Bold Republic is back on the air, and on the air with me right now is Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group. So you wanted to talk a little bit about some headway we made in civil forfeiture law?
Absolutely. Last week, the Joint Judiciary Committee of the Wyoming Legislature met in Newcastle, and we've been doing this topic since the last session, discussing reforms to the area of civil forfeiture. Now, those not familiar with civil forfeiture, it's under the Wyoming Controlled Substances Act. Law enforcement has the authority to seize not just drugs, but drug-related property, and then they can then go to court and move to have a permanently deprive you of that property, and that includes cash, firearms, cars, houses, you name it, just about anything related to the drug trade. They can do this without convicting you of a crime. They can do this without even charging you of a crime. And it's been on the books since 1970, and a lot of information has been pretty much unavailable throughout the areas. I put forth, helped Representative Kendall Croker out of Casper draft a simple reform bill that was pretty adamantly opposed by law enforcement in some aspects of it. And, at the time I was told I was misinformed about civil forfeiture, but I continue to do research and I continue to come across some very shocking things. For example, there was no reporting at all to the Wyoming legislature by the Attorney General, who's in charge of the forfeiture proceedings. No reporting at all since 1998. So here we had 16 years of a practice going on without any kind of legislative oversight whatsoever. The Attorney General, to their credit, has been straightforward with me, providing me with a lot of information, and I've discovered that the average seizure in Wyoming is about $2,000. The average forfeiture is about $1,000. So some people are getting their money back, and that's great, but you look at those numbers, and you quickly realize that you have to go to civil court. This isn't a criminal court. You're not provided with a lawyer if you can't afford one, so if you want to go there, you can try and do it yourself, which is really hard. Or you can pay a lawyer, but why are you going to pay a lawyer $5,000, which is probably the cost, conservatively, to go get back your $2,000? So it's really stacked in the state's favor. And again, the Attorney General, to their credit, and police, when they're enforcing this law, it usually really is drug-related property. You know, they find a car with, pounds of marijuana or pounds of heroin or meth inside of it, and they find a bunch of cash with it and guns. Yeah, well, there you go. It's pretty easy to make that case, and the odds are the person in the car is going to be charged and convicted of a crime. So at least then you're losing the actual proceeds. But what was particularly disturbing, what continues to be disturbing, is kind of the lackadaisical approach of some people within law enforcement testifying to things that are simply not true. Byron Odakoven, who's the head of the, I believe the county, I always forget the name, the sheriffs and one of their lobbying groups, testified that he was trying to give examples to the committee. And he said that somebody driving down the road with $20,000 of cash in their car to go buy a bull is not at risk, that law enforcement would not take his money. Now, unfortunately, it not only could happen, it already has happened. And I went through a number of examples for the committee, and this is something, again, listen carefully. In December of 2008, a Florida man driving through Wyoming, $17,000 in cash in a .44 Magnum, no drugs, had those two things taken away by Wyoming Highway Patrol, and then he had to go and get it back. He went back to Florida and he lawyered up, and to the AG's credit, they gave him his stuff back. But why was it taken in the first place? This guy, they took his stuff and they didn't charge him with a crime. They just let him go. So that tells you there's a problem here. In 2010, almost the same situation, some guys from North Carolina driving through Wyoming, $7,000 in cash, taken away. Now again, they didn't have to go to court. The AG looked at this case and they said, this is ridiculous. Let's give the money back. And even when they give the money back, they have people sign this waiver that says they won't hold the state responsible. And it can take months to get your property back.
What if you don't sign the waiver? Do you get your stuff back?
Well, I imagine then you probably have to, they take it to court. Now, these are only a few cases out of the 400 or so that the AG has done from 2008 to 2013. That was the area that I was really looking closely at, more recent forfeitures. And again, most of these cases are involving drugs. Most of these cases are legitimate. But don't tell me there isn't a problem in the law. And don't say that somebody driving down the road with cash, which is perfectly legal on its own, is not at risk here in Wyoming. So I really urge people, if you think that's a problem, if you think it's problematic that the police in Wyoming can arbitrarily seize your money, firearms, cars, homes in these cases without finding drugs, charging you of a crime, or even convicting you of a crime, innocent until proven guilty, then please do call your legislators, email them, reach out. You can, of course, check our website, wyliberty, wyliberty.org, to learn more about this topic. Because I really believe going into this session, I'm very happy to say the Judiciary Committee has two reform bills, one of them far better than the other, but both of them very good, that are going to be heard again at their next committee meeting, and that's going to be the last time they consider it, and then in January, there'll be hopefully one of them or both of them will be brought forth as committee bills in the Wyoming legislature, but there's going to be serious opposition again by law enforcement. And again, this is not an abuse by law enforcement. This is simply the enforcement of a very bad law. But for them to come forth and continue to present things that are either that I don't know if they're lying, but they're wrong. Right. They're spreading misinformation to the committee, and that's wrong. And I believe there's going to be staunch opposition again, and it's going to be Steve Kline of the Wyoming Liberty Group and Linda Burt of the ACLU versus the law enforcement establishment, and we're really going to need all the grassroots help we can get.
Right,
So
and if somebody knows of any stories